Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily summary of the fighting on the Ukrainian front. Well, what can I say? The United States has launched its own special military operation. Today this was announced by the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. In the Caribbean Sea, and of course we all understand perfectly well that the most likely target will be Venezuela. At the same time, yesterday Zelensky gave a speech, once again showing off, talking about how everything in Pokrovsk is under control, but if the local commanders decide to abandon the city, then let them abandon it. But overall, the situation is deadlocked. Russia has no advances. Or rather, no advances. We will see that together in a moment. So let us move on to reviewing the situation on the front line. So friends, things for the armed forces of Ukraine on the front, I must tell you, are becoming more and more disastrous. That is precisely why Peskov said yesterday that since Ukraine does not want to negotiate now, the next conditions for it will be even worse. And there are reasons for this. Just so you understand, over the past 24 hours, Russian forces took control of more than 50 square kilometers. And on one section of the front, Ukraine suffered a truly total collapse. In fact, on two sections. But today we will cover only one of them. So let us break down the advance. And we begin once again with the zone of responsibility of the Vostok grouping. These guys capture a village practically every single day. Have you noticed? Every day, every single day, we begin with the advances of the Vostok grouping. This time, there was good progress in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Here, the fighters moved forward more than 5 kilometers and took the village of Danilivka under control. It must be said that for quite a long time, the armed forces of Ukraine held back the pressure in the area of Danilivka. Nevertheless, the Russian troops eventually pushed through and secured the settlement. And the most important part is not even that the village was taken under control, but that with the capture of Danilivka, the main supply artery of the city of Huliaipole was cut. This is the Pokrovsk-Huliaipole road, which, as you can see on the map, directly connects to Danilivka. I emphasize once more, this is not drone control, this is physical control. The road is physically cut. Nothing will be able to drive through here anymore. Yes, the city still has one remaining supply road, the Amelnik-Huliaipole road, but it is also currently under Russian drone control, because the distance from the forward Russian positions to that road is 4 kilometers. In any case, drones easily reach it, which means the supply of the Ukrainian garrison in Huliaipole is now going to be severely crippled. And considering that the Vostok grouping is already approaching Huliaipole from the northeast, and I believe they will reach the outskirts by the end of the month, the disruption of logistics will play a critical role here. Returning to the Dnipropetrovsk region, Danilivka became the 26th settlement to come under Russian control in this region. And today, another piece of good news arrived from this same area. Russian forces pushed the armed forces of Ukraine out of the settlement of Arestopol, and the fighting has shifted to the next settlement, Velika Mikhailivka, meaning this is now the 27th settlement under Russian control. Once the Russian army seizes Velika Mikhailivka, things for the armed forces of Ukraine here will become even worse, because this settlement is not small. It is very convenient for building up forces, and logistics through it are excellent. After taking this settlement, the Russian army can calmly prepare to storm the next settlement in this area, Pokrovsk. Just a little more, and soon discussions about the Dnipropetrovsk region will take a far more serious tone. As for additional advances, then south of here, on the border between the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, they moved forward 3.5 kilometers in the direction of Radostna. From the current positions to the village, it is 4.5 kilometers. Now we move on to Pokrovsk. There were no major news reports from inside the city, only that on the eastern outskirts, Russian forces moved slightly closer to the southern approaches to the settlement of Rovna. But you know what is happening. The bodies of Ukrainian soldiers are being removed from Pokrovsk by truckloads. Yes, I am not joking. There is footage of this. It shows exactly how the bodies are taken out. They even show the quantity. And indeed, one large truck per day, consistently, loaded with the bodies of Ukrainian fighters. This is the price they had to pay for the lack of an order to withdraw from the city. As for the advances, Russian forces managed to take the settlement of Suky Yar, which lies to the south between Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. Plus, there were also small movements in Rodinske. Yes, here it seems like very little, literally 200 meters, but these 200 meters are in a district of multi-story apartment blocks. They managed to take control of 8 such buildings at once, plus school number 36. And it is important to understand that over the past 2 weeks, the armed forces of Ukraine had been pushing very hard into the city. But the Russian fighters not only held all attacks, they even slightly improved their positions. As you can see, the fighting for the city continues. The fighting is heavy because the city is extremely important. If the armed forces of Ukraine manage to recapture it, then things in Mirnohrad will be much easier for them, and they will be able to extract their blocked garrison. But if Russian forces hold the city and take it fully under control, then that is it. The armed forces of Ukraine in Mirnohrad will have nowhere to go. Russian open-source analysts claim that the plan the armed forces of Ukraine were trying to carry out here has already failed, and Russian forces are gradually improving their positions everywhere the Ukrainian troops had pushed them back earlier. Moving on, there were advances on the Constantinovka axis. Here, Russian forces managed to push forward on a section of terrain about 3.5 kilometers wide. And essentially, as you can see, they managed to completely block Ivanopil from the east. And Ivanopil is the last stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine before the city. Russian troops have already secured the southern outskirts of the village, and now they have blocked it from the east and reached the northern outskirts, effectively squeezing the settlement in a vice. So we expect good news from here soon. If we move slightly further north, there has been some activity on the Kramatorsk direction. Here, the fighters advanced 1.5 kilometers, moving toward the approaches to the settlement of Markov. From the current positions to the southern outskirts of the village is 750 meters. By the way, this is one of those settlements that had been previously declared captured in advance, so to speak, because its capture was announced back on the 5th of September. And now we are already in mid-November. So more than 2 months have passed, and not a single piece of objective control footage has been received from there. And in reality, the Russian army is only now reaching the approaches. But let us not dwell on the disappointing parts. The ones who should be disappointed are the armed forces of Ukraine. Their true collapse happened on another section, which I mentioned at the very beginning of this report. It happened on the Lyman direction. There they suffered a full-scale disaster. Just look at the extent of the advances, and most importantly, the advances are everywhere. In the east, in the north, and in the west. See? Let us go step by step. First, Russian forces managed to advance 1 kilometer 300 meters in the forested area, and, importantly, they took the railway station under control. Why is this important? Because just 900 meters more, and they will reach Urozhaina Street in Yampil, which will immediately and drastically change the balance of power in the battle for this urban-type settlement. Second, Russian forces managed to advance 2 kilometers toward the eastern outskirts of the city of Lyman. As you can see, Russian positions now tightly control the eastern approaches to Lyman. Third, just slightly farther north, they advanced more than 4 kilometers from Zerekny. The movement here is directed toward the Stavky-Lyman road, and essentially this is already about reaching the northern outskirts of the city. In other words, once again, the Russian army is trying to squeeze Lyman in a vice, and for now, it is succeeding. In the north, Russian positions were improved in the area of Stavky and Drobyshiv. But a very interesting situation has developed on the western side. Yes, here you can see that the armed forces of Ukraine pushed the Russian army back a little, pushed them away from the water treatment facilities. But in light of all the other Russian advances, these are small efforts that change nothing overall. What did the Russian army achieve here? From the Nitrius River, they advanced 3.5 kilometers, moving toward the village of Korovyi Yar. In addition, they managed to form pincers from 2 sides, encircling the urban-type settlement of Yarova. See, here in the forests, they advanced 1 kilometer 800 meters, cutting the railway lines west of the Yarova station and essentially reaching the settlement itself, specifically Ivan Trush Street. From the eastern side, the same thing happened. They cut the railway tracks, reached the Novoselkov station, and, attention, entered the southern part of the settlement of Yarova. Moreover, they did not simply enter and secure a couple of houses on the outskirts. They pushed deeply into the residential area. The depth of the advance in the residential districts of Yarova was almost 900 meters. We will see how this develops, but for now the situation for the armed forces of Ukraine here is a complete, total collapse. Just so you understand, from these positions, Russian units are only 3 kilometers from the eastern outskirts of the city of Sviatogorsk. Quite interesting, right? And the area of territory captured just here, on the Lyman axis, amounts to 36 square kilometers. An incredible result. The armed forces of Ukraine also had some movements here, but as I said, in light of Russia's advances, these are pitiful attempts. They took control of 4.5 square kilometers, while Russian fighters took 36. But the bad news for the armed forces of Ukraine does not end there. It is also reported that Russian forces pressed the Ukrainian troops out of Dronivka. Now objective footage has already appeared. The village is fully under Russian control. They also collapsed on another section, near Vovchansk. Inside the city there were no advances in the past 24 hours, but there were advances on the flank. Russian forces moved forward 1 kilometer 200 meters and took the settlement of Sinelnikov, automatically reaching the approaches to the next settlement, Lyman, because the distance between the two villages here is only 300 meters. In general, they are no longer capable of holding even the Vovchansk front, which they managed to hold for more than a year. Previously, the Russian army had practically no advances there. And now, you see it, almost every day there is news from the Vovchansk section as well. I am certain that by the end of the year, Vovchansk itself will also fully come under Russian control. If we summarize everything, over the past 24 hours, more than 52 square kilometers, to be precise, 52.4 square kilometers, came under Russian control. This is so far the best result of the month of November. But in Zelensky's reality, in Zelensky's imaginary reality, the situation is deadlocked and Russia has no advances. Well, let him stay in his own reality. So that is all I have for today regarding the situation on the front. Now let us take a look at what is happening on the political stage. Our source reports that over the past 2 months, the Russian armed forces significantly increased their exchange fund. There are many prisoners. Ukrainian soldiers are now surrendering more often. This is due to many factors: low morale, more and more mobilized men taken from the streets, disappointment with the authorities. Ukrainian servicemen see captivity as a chance to survive. Zelensky continues to emphasize that partners demand tougher mobilization. He claims that 30,000 people are being mobilized per month, but keeps silent about the fact that 35% of them end up in the irrecoverable losses category during the first month. And thousands of older soldiers also end up in the same category every month due to disillusionment. This creates a wild shortage of manpower on the front lines, according to the Telegram channel Legitimate. Zelensky also keeps quiet about the fact that he personally promised Biden to toughen mobilization back at the end of last year, but then began stalling and feeding partners various schemes like Contract 18 to 22 and so on, which turned out to be failures. Now the partners stopped giving enough money and pressured him through Nebu and the Mendich corruption cases. Zelensky responded with a counter-argument, saying that the whole Western client network in Ukraine must publicly support tougher mobilization, and then he will approve it. Klitschko was the first to begin. The issue of toughening mobilization is already decided. The only question is when exactly Zelensky will launch it. And yes, tightening mobilization will not solve the problem, it will only postpone the collapse. Our source reports that Zelensky agreed to the sponsors' demands regarding stricter mobilization. The timeline is set. It must be intensified before the spring of the year 2026. Before that, there will be a mass narrative warming up campaign. And as usual, the simplest people will be driven to the front, while the elite and the political inner circle will once again profit from it. Now, the main statements from Dmitry Peskov. Russia will act accordingly if the United States returns to nuclear testing. Russia will continue achieving results on the battlefield since there is no possibility for negotiations. The statement by Kiev about ending negotiations formalized its unwillingness to continue contacts. The Kremlin called Ukraine's refusal to continue negotiations sad. Ukraine will eventually have to return to negotiations, but from much worse positions. The Kremlin does not agree with Rubio's words that Russia does not want peace. Moscow wants peace and is open to resolving the conflict in Ukraine through political and diplomatic means. Listening to one's counterpart is a rule of diplomacy and good manners, something Kyiv is not very capable of, Peskov remarked, commenting on the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry's hostility toward Medinsky. The Kremlin considers Medinsky's historical lectures deep and meaningful, Peskov added. Speaking of Rubio, he said regarding sanctions against Russia, "There is almost nothing left to sanction. We have hit their largest oil companies. That is what everyone expected. Honestly, I do not know what else can be done. In this respect, our options for new sanctions are nearly exhausted."